I have, I guess, 10 minutes here, and I'm gonna kind of break this up because I thought I would kind of share a few photos of some of the work that I do in the theater. So I'm in a theater department here at the University of Missouri in Missouri, USA, which is pretty much like right in the middle of the USA, and have been doing theater for many years, for decades, and have incorporated digital sort of media into my work for quite a long time. And so I thought I first want to talk a little bit about the call and then kind of save half my time to kind of show you a few things that I've done and kind of use that as an entryway back into the call to talk about like what kinds of articles people might submit to the journal, what types of things we're thinking about for this issue. I think there's a lot of really important things here. When we first started kind of thinking about this idea for a call for papers, for the idea of a special issue about this, it seems like so long ago, right? Like time is just warped, and things seem like so long ago, but yet not so long ago. And so like looking back at this call for papers in some ways looks like a little, like it feels like a little bit dated already, but also like very prescient. You know what I mean? Like some of it is like already come true, and like things are moving so fast that I think that's why we wanted to put out this call for papers to respond to current events and just how this is affecting, I think, not only theater and performance, but really all of society. And I come to this, I guess, like in terms of positionality and kind of what my position is. So first of all, like being an academic here in the US is a certain kind of position and privilege. The way that this has affected all of us, things are going hybrid, right? So like one of the things that has happened at my university is that classes went online. And so almost overnight, almost a year ago, like to the date, like a year ago, I can literally tell you March 11th, 2020, I got the email, I was in class and we were told that classes were now canceled for the rest of the semester and we're going online. We're going online, right? And so that's like what we're talking about now. Like, what does that mean to go online and to take something that's a live practice and then kind of crunch it up, narrow it, flatten it, and then push it through this communication device that's not that you can use to perform with, but it's not as robust and it's not as there's different things about it, right, that we've been studying and talking about. And so so like one of my first reactions, and I still feel this way, was like I feel like not like in the context of the journal, because I think that the journal and the digital and the people that are involved in the journal very much understand the digital and the intersection of the digital and theater and technology. But in like, I often feel like being connected to theater and that being part of my positionality in the theater world, like live performance, for many people is like the only way to go, right? There's actually like philosophical debates and ethical debates about whether you have to be live in order to, you know, make a political statement, or what it means for the body to be mediatized, right? And to be sort of become digital. And so for many years, like within the context of theater, I felt for many years like I was just kind of like a lone person in a field screaming at the gods, right? Like screaming at like no, we need to pay attention to the digital. Online performance is a kind of performance, and it just met with deaf ears, right? I literally had a email conversation with Philip Auslander, of all people, who wrote the book about liveness, about whether or not online performance is a kind of performance, like whether or not like performing online can kind of count in the world of performance studies and of performance. And surprisingly, he was resistant. I'd like to have that conversation again with him now. And it's a lot more complex than that, but just like then overnight, suddenly after we all were told to go online, there's suddenly a lot of experts, right? Of like, oh, we're just going to take our theater and we're just going to like plan it here online. So like there's like a real mix of kind of things going on when we talk about online performance, because some of it has been really like informed by practices that have been going on for decades. And then other work is, I don't feel as informed. And so, and I think all of it is interesting to look at the different kind of ways that people have attempted to move theater and performance online. There's different ways of doing it, right? So already like here, 6 months past when we wrote this call, like we're already starting to get these kind of new models and these new kind of paradigms, right? Like, well, the paradigm we're talking through right now, right? This is a performance paradigm. This is Zoom. This is now a trope, right? Like, this is now a way that people do music videos, or a way that Saturday Night Live sketches are created, right? And what's really happening here, so it is a kind of performance. And again, like I'm a theater person, but also look at the kind of like wider human behavior as a kind of performance. And so I'm performing, I'm part of a panel that's performing for an audience, but I'm performing through this technology, right? That's mediatized, that's being mediated in some very interesting ways. In fact, like our experience, all of us that are in this Zoom room, that's like, you know, a room, right? It's a space. We all perceive to be here together in real time. In reality, that's not what's happening, right? Like, and it's not, it's imperceptible. It's going to be microseconds, but we're all separated a little bit in time, but depending on our devices, our internet access speed, sort of where our geographical location is, all of these signals are coming into the Zoom server at a little bit different speed. And then the Zoom technology has to like align that and then spit it back out at us. And sometimes it's good at that, and sometimes it's not so good, right? So we're all kind of like time travelers here, just by microseconds with each other. So like, that's also a problem when, for example, for musicians, so I've noted, so this is like one of the kind of genres that's happened out of the pandemic is singing and public singing, and singing online and trying to find ways to sing online with each other. And Zoom is not good at that. I don't know if you've tried that, but it's like with that time difference, it's very hard to synchronize that. And there are ways of synchronizing signals like that, but it takes specific kinds of software and technology and the knowledge to like put that together. And not everybody has that, right? So we have this human being that is like human homo performance, right? Victor Turner, and like we were meant to perform, and suddenly we're put inside and we don't have these live venues anymore. But we find a way to do it online. We find a way to do it with technology. And so I've kind of like covered, like, I think I've already taken probably 5 minutes and just like kind of touched on a few of those topics in the call. So like liveness, like that idea of what is liveness? Does liveness mean to be in real time? Or does it mean to be physically co-present? Or does it mean both? Is live, the way that the word live is now being applied is so interesting. The other night I went to a live event that was the Chancellor's Showcase, where it was held in a parking lot, and a video projection was projected on the side of a building. And in our cars, we parked in the parking lot and then tuned our radios to a certain station. And then we watched a video of pre-recorded performances, but it was billed as a live event. And it actually felt like a live event. It was different than sitting inside your house talking through Zoom, or not being able to go into a theater and see performance live. It was like the next best thing. And so now we're starting to talk about this as like what is live is constantly shifting. And so I think as someone who like thinks about liveness and presence a lot, looking back at the call, I was trying to remember like which parts I wrote and which parts others wrote. And I think I see like my voice coming through in part of the liveness and part of the scholarship. But I'm really interested in those theoretical things, like how does this change what we think of as liveness? What does this change about what we think of as the virtual and how we talk about the virtual, right? Like what does that mean? When our reality is all virtual, what is virtual reality? And does that term even have any meaning anymore? Like, I don't think it does. And so that would be something I'm writing about, and I would love to read others writing about. Just like the other part I think I contributed to is just that idea of scholarship, right? Like, you know, how is this changing just the way that we study these things, how we talk about these things, especially when it's happening so fast, right? When I feel like oftentimes when I'm talking about like virtual reality or some of these digital trends, it's so difficult even just to keep up with what the latest thing is going on. And so I think scholarship, and in fact, a lot of my scholarship has turned back, and I've actually been looking at like the virtuality pre-digital, like what did that mean pre-digital? And so, so yeah, okay. Let's see, how much time do I have left? Because I'm just gonna like really briefly go through some of the photos that I had planned to like talk about for 5 minutes. How much time do I have left? And I also had planned to like hit my timer and then failed on that. So I think I may have like 2 minutes. Is that?
Yeah. I think you've covered about 10 minutes, but that's okay. Keep going.
I'll just really briefly like just like stop talking and then show you some of the work that I've done. And actually it starts with a couple of photos from 2012, 2 years after I came to the University of Missouri, and projections had never appeared on stage. And so I wanted to do Hamlet with a projection, the ghost as a projection. Do I have share screen? I don't think I have share screen. Can I be given privilege to share screen, please? Still saying I'm disabled. Is our host still here? Jafar, are you still here?
Yeah. I'm just drawing. Yeah.
I see, this always happens to me in Zoom. Like I'll try to find a setting and then it's not there when it used to be there, or where I thought it was.
Oh, I guess now you can share your screen.
Okay. Okay.
Yes, it should be okay now.
Just drawing.
I was going to real briefly show you this. So this is just a photo of Hamlet, the ghost of Hamlet on stage. So one projection, one projector. This is something we did in 2015 called the Orphan Sea that used projections. And so it was actually like a Greek style orchestra with a wraparound IMAX style projection screen that had, I think we had 5 projectors going for this one, controlled through Isadora. So it's controlled through software that controls the image and projects it. So working a lot with projection, the idea of projection. That's another one from Orphan Sea. So dancing, acting in front of these skene. This is actually from Antigone that I did in 2016. And the idea was a failure to mediate, and kind of this television screen meets classical Greek architecture as projection screen. So when I see this picture, I see Zoom, right? Like I see that already, like these ideas of multi-channel communication and our lives being sort of put into these little digital flat screens and boxes. Like this like kind of what's happening now, right? This is something I did in 2019. This is Alice. This was a adaptation of Alice in Wonderland that we did in a cave style live virtual reality setup, or I guess inspired by virtual reality. So what you're looking at is just 2 sides of a 3-sided set of projections set as projection screens. We have 7 projectors here. So as you can see, we just keep getting more and more digital and more projections, but still kind of the live meets the digital. And then last year that all stopped, right? The live part of that just went away for a while, but it will come back. It's going to come back in a different form, in a hybrid form, I think. But I'll stop talking now because I want to hear our other panelists. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much, Kevin. Yes, thank you. That was great. And we can move on to Nick.
Great, thanks, Maria. I would also like to share my screen. Oh, and it's going to allow me to, hopefully. Good, let's just try this. Just bear with me a minute. Again. Okay, hopefully you can see that.
We can see it, Nick, yes.
Great, thank you. So I'm just going to try and get into presenter mode. There we go. Great, so I want to start with actually some conventional theatre. This is some production shots from a production of Love and Information, Carol Churchill play, done in New York back in 2014. So if we just start with that as a thought, and then this is also a production of Love and Information, same play, created during the first lockdown period back getting on for a year ago by some of the MA actor performer training students at Rose Bruford College, where I'm based. I just kind of want to notice from the point of view of what as an audience member you are looking at, these two things don't look particularly different. You've got pairs of people generally talking to each other. And they're kind of, you know, they're framed in a kind of a simplified environment. The focus is very much on the performers having a conversation. And that's to some extent an inherent part of this particular play, because it's a very large number of very short scenes, little snippets of dialogue and conversation. But we've become very used to this idea that, you know, our immediate response to the going online thing, exactly what Kevin was just talking about, was to suddenly go, how can we make performances? We're not used to making some kind of digital performance. How can we move our theatre practice online? And certainly with students, where there's a kind of, you know, you're pretty much compelled to come up with some kind of project that they can do to fulfill their learning and get assessed to get their qualification and everything. The immediate result, you know, sort of resort is this kind of idea of, you know, they can sit at home or wherever they are with their mobile phones, with a camera. We can composite this video back together and we can create this kind of Zoom-like little heads in boxes performance. But it is perhaps worth remembering that we've been putting actors' heads into little boxes for quite a long time, well before the digital performance era, at least the sort of current sense of the internet capacity here. This is a production I lit of As You Like It in the UK back in the middle of the 1990s, which, as it happens, the scenography of this scene involved putting people in little boxes. So I'm interested here, and the reason I've introduced this really is the thought that part of this shift of response with COVID and this sort of acceleration of lots of different kinds of approaches to moving theatre online or into digital realms actually has a bigger impact, arguably, on the audience's experience than it does on the work that you make. And particularly, you know, the examples I've just given have a kind of, certainly visually, a kind of similarity, I suppose. But where the audience is, the circumstances in which they are watching are extremely different. And it seems to me that's a big part of the shift that's taking place here, is suddenly this idea I might go to the theatre doesn't involve going out on a wet November evening and getting on the train and going into the centre of the city and turning up at a theatre and sitting in an auditorium with a lot of other people. I might be at home on my sofa in my front room. I might be on the bus watching it on my mobile phone, I might be sat watching it on a computer screen, whatever. So that thought that actually a big part of this shift is a kind of really radical transformation of the audience experience. And I kind of said, what's the auditorium now? And that thing that theatre architects and theatre consultants put a huge amount of thought into in terms of designing purpose-built buildings for theatre to take place in, suddenly all of that is swept aside. And we as the makers of performance, we no longer have control over the conditions of the viewing of the performance. So that's one thing I suppose I've been thinking about, which connects into the call. Another thing is coming at this from a very different kind of approach to what digital theatre might be. A couple of pictures here from some work we've been doing at the college using our new motion capture system as part of a project called The Round. And The Round is a project looking at developing an online platform for AR or mixed reality performance. So the idea is that you motion capture a live performance and that the audience can see that on a mobile phone screen or a tablet or whatever as a mixed reality experience wherever they are. So the performance appears in a sort of quasi holographic sense in the room that you're in. And just a couple of pictures here. We've got obviously just a kind of, literal photograph of a couple of performers and a camera operator in the motion capture system. And I'm sure most of you are aware, but in case you're not, motion capture works by infrared cameras picking up the colored dots on the outfit that the performers are wearing. It captures that as 3D data, so the system knows precisely where that body is in space and captures that in real time. So it captures that movement, and you can then put that into the virtual environment and kind of reskin, as it were, that movement. So you use that movement to control the movement of a completely digitally created character. And as the image here implies, you can put that then into a virtual reality environment, and you can do all sorts of atmospheric effects. So this is obviously a still grab from the live video feed. So you can have the mist rolling through the grass, and you can do all of whatever kind of scenographic effects you wish to create. One of the things that we're exploring with this is the thought that once we've fully digitized that performance, which we can do in real time, because that's one of the things that motion capture, that system allows you to do. And the idea of the project of The Round is that it gets transmitted in real time to the audience. You don't pre-record this. But actually, what's the difference? So back to the stuff Kevin was talking about in terms of liveness. What would make an audience aware that it is watching a real-time performance, when actually you could simply record that data stream and play it back at a different point and have exactly the same data arriving for the audience? So one of the things I think we're really interested in with The Round is, again, revisiting this question of liveness from an audience perspective, and what is it that gives an audience a sense of liveness, and to what extent does that matter to audiences? And I'll come back to that in a moment, so maybe just hold that thought for a moment. This is something actually Maria mentioned at the beginning. The National Theatre in London for some time now has been doing something called NT Live, which has been a broadcast model of live theatre shows into cinemas. So audiences around the country could turn up in a cinema and see this live streamed. So it still feels like theatre. It's definitely not film. It certainly doesn't have the aesthetics or the kind of dramatic language of film or indeed of television. You're kind of very aware that you're looking at a theatre production, but you access it through the medium of the camera and the live stream. And as part of the National's response to going into lockdown back last summer, it gave new access to its kind of back catalogue, as it were, of NT Live performances, including this one, Frankenstein. And it used the YouTube Premiere platform. And the way that it worked was that they were available for 1 week, and you could watch it at any time that you chose during that period of availability. But there was an initial showing at a time on the first day of the week. So rather like a theatre show, it started at, I don't know, 7:30 in the evening or something. And what was really interesting watching some of those, that when you turned up, because there's the live chat going on, the sense of sitting down 10 minutes before the thing is due to start and people are, you know, putting their comments into the live chat, the kind of sense of audience buzz that you get, even though I was watching it, as it happened, sat on my own in my front room, the sense of expectancy that you get because it's going to happen, you know it's going to start at a particular time, you know that you're aware that there are other people waiting as you are for the performance to start, felt very analogous to sitting in an auditorium waiting for the show to start and the buzz of the auditorium, people talking and so on. So that was quite an interesting, I suppose, contribution to this thought about liveness and audience experience. And also reading some quite interesting analysis after this. There was no, you didn't have to pay, but you were asked to donate. And the analysis of the data after the season had finished showed that both the biggest proportion of the audience and an even bigger proportion of the donations received took place during that kind of initial, as it were, live showing. So I think, you know, something like half the audience watched it at that point and the other half watched it at some point during the week, and 70 to 80% of the money came in. So there's something really interesting there, I think, about audience engagement and this kind of creating this sense of this being an event rather than it being a recorded medium that you can access at your leisure. And then this is, again, something that Maria talked about earlier, the RSC's dream. And I was really struck by a review of this production by Francesca Pesce in Excellent magazine. And a quote here, in terms of the interactive aspect, which certainly for Francesca clearly didn't fulfill her, her desire to interact with this performance to any great extent. And I think this idea of interactivity, which is often sort of pitched as being, this is the thing that's going to make it seem live and give that kind of audience engagement. Well, it might do, but you're arguably going to have to do a bit better than the RSC did with this one. And I think there's a lot of exploration and development and thinking still to be done in terms of this idea, quite what we might mean by interactivity in the context of digitized mediated theatre. So just trying to pull a few of those strands together. Yeah, so what, where, how is the auditorium? What's it like? What's that audience experience? Where are they going to see this? And what, if anything, do we want to do as theatre makers about the fact that we've lost control of that? And then a thought, pulling together some of these liveness strands, and as has been pointed out, this debate around liveness has been going on for a good old time now, and it still feels to some extent, I suspect quite a lot of us are a bit bored with it, but it also feels like we haven't quite resolved it either. So a suggestion that we might want to start thinking in terms of eventfulness, the idea of the event, and what is it that makes an audience think they're part of an event, because that seems to be quite an attractive part of the of what we have to offer and of what theatre has to offer, and stop fretting about which aspects of that are live and which they're not, and you know how you might sort of theorize or debate that, and thinking about that in terms of togetherness. So that thing that I felt very strongly with the NT Live thing, it really felt like I was there with other people in a moment. Interactivity and the challenges around ideas of interactivity and what its value might be. And yeah, recorded versus live media, mediated stuff, when at a kind of literal level of bit for bit, can you actually tell the difference between something that's live streamed and something that's just been captured and then replayed at a later point? And then fleshing out another part of the core, just briefly, I want to mention and remind ourselves that we are, as an industry for theatre, there's an awful lot of people who actually make their living doing this and haven't been able to do so either entirely or fully over the last year. And wanting to kind of recognize the impact at a very human level that that's had, and some really interesting research that's been done by an organisation in the UK called PIPA, which is Parents and Carers in the Performing Arts. This touches on the kind of equality and access issues that are picked up in the call. 72% of parents and carers in the performing arts industries are thinking about leaving that industry. 50% furloughed in the industry, and obviously different schemes in different parts of the world, but the kind of furloughing model that we've had here, which is being ways of paying people's wages while they're not able to work, obviously funded by government, has been much higher in the arts sector than it has across the general population. Huge numbers of redundancies, huge numbers of people who are, often freelancers or work 0 hours contracts or short-term contracts, losing income. So kind of recognizing that human dimension, but also thinking about the future as we come out of this. And there's certainly in the UK, and I'm sure in other parts of the world, a lot of thinking being done in the industry. We've got a campaign going on at the moment, which is called Reset Better. The idea, there's a lot of appetite at the moment for changing working practices and moving away from some of the, quite historic and pretty unfriendly practices that we often have in theatre, of working very long hours, rather unregulated, inadequate breaks, etc., etc. So that's the Reset Better campaign, and I think that if we can capture that kind of groundswell that's happening at the moment, we might create a better environment for people to make their work in the future, and that feels really positive. And some of this stuff, just remembering that the digital technologies are bringing changes to how we make the work as well as the work that we make. And I have spoken to many, many, many people in the industry who say, if nothing else comes out of this, at least we're going to stop traveling halfway across the country on a train to have a 1-hour production meeting where we say next to nothing and then get back on the train and go home again. We've all got used to the idea you can work actually quite effectively on Zoom and online meetings. At least some of that stuff hopefully is going to stick, and we can save ourselves some time, some money, and some general all of that. So there we are, and hopefully people have been able to see how that connects into the call, but and hopefully it begins to illustrate, and I know Peter will broaden it further, some of the potential scope that we've got in the call and the kind of range of things that we're really interested to hear people's views on.
Thank you so much, Nick. That was great. It's a good thing we didn't choose the same image of Dream.
Oh, yeah.
So Peter is next, and then we can have a discussion.
Thanks. I will definitely take some of that charge up of talking through some of these exact things with some images that I hope to show you from some different productions that address 3 things in the call that are certainly really interesting to me going forward. And I'll talk about them in just a second. But what some of this sense of liveness, sense of pandemic, and all of this has done, particularly in some Canadian production context for me. You'll see that I'm pretending I'm in the beautiful Rocky Mountains. I'm not, but trying to use the digital to create that experience. But seeing ways in which a lot of the smaller companies and smaller festivals in Canada have used this as chances to partner and find ways to create shows that can bridge that distance, even though the distance is not a 10-minute train ride, but more like a 6 or 7 day train ride across Canada. Companies from British Columbia and Nova Scotia are working together to produce one show that they live broadcast at different times and finding ways to work with it. By the way, NT Live Treasure Island saved my course last year. We were supposed to go see a play and we couldn't, so we just watched Treasure Island live, all of us chatting in our own chat, watching it to create the experience of the students and I going to a play. So that was really, really welcome. But particularly with our journal's focus, I'm interested in how productions and artists like Aaron Collier here, who you see in the poster for Frequencies, produced by Heist Theatre and Theatre Outre. Heist is in Nova Scotia. Theatre Outre is in Alberta, in the city of Lethbridge. And they did a co-production working with Aaron to create a one-person, one camera and a VR camera music dance show experience, where Aaron is actually a club DJ at times, and he worked with not only performing as a solo performer, but asking how he could incorporate live music, live rhythms, live beats. And this is a show that found a way to send you a video beforehand about wearing noise-canceling headphones. So trying to create a very insular reality experience that was produced as a 1-hour show where Aaron walks through some very personal stories about losing his brother when he was a young boy, and using virtual reality to sort of visualize and graph the frequencies that connect everyone and the rhythms and cycles of time. But it was something he could produce and work with another human being, the wonderful technician here wearing the VR headset, who danced and worked with him with the music in rhythm in a contained theater space safely, and able to sort of broadcast at different times to project a kind of liveness that Nick was talking about, and that that we're all talking about. Finding ways to give this festival show a life to people in communities all across Canada and around the world who want to log in, to change up the access points, students and underfunded tickets at less than $5 Canadian, which is practically nothing, to be able to log in to see this show, and finding ways to fund it through different festival funds and have it be kind of synchronously produced in multiple Canadian provinces and cities all at once in tandem. Something like what Aaron's done really interests me because of that combination of different types of mediatized sort of technology, from music and rhythm to sound to dance and movement. And I know it was only myself and my wife clapping at the end, but when the VR performer came out for their clap, their bow at the end, the movement from that person wearing the headset with, if you've ever worn it, little dimensional sort of relationships was fascinating and certainly amazing. To me, this speaks to what the call wants to talk about in terms of public, private, and festival partnerships. Will festivals work differently and always now create and produce some components that are global and virtual, some components that are local, and combinations of those things, as well as like this, being able to bring all of us from where we are geolocated into this common Zoom space, as Kevin had mentioned. Likewise, I'm particularly interested in audience interactivity and other performances that are really kind of taking this idea of liveness and gaming and experience and altering it very drastically for us. This is Eggtooth Productions from Northampton, Massachusetts, who did a production called Stagehand, which was a bunch of us in Zoom and then being paired with one of us who would be our kind of, they called it a Charlie, our avatar, who would hold up a camera and walk around a theater space, and you could say, Charlie, go backstage, and the camera would go backstage. Charlie, look at the prompt book, and they would zoom in and you could see, you know, what's circled and what's where. Charlie, go to the props table, and meeting actors and interacting. They were doing a production of Macbeth, and they were trying to talk about different sort of elements that were going on with it, and trying to sort of explore theater space, almost like it's an interactive environment. And using sort of checkpoints and points where they could get you to move around the space, and what it meant in terms of pedagogies as well. Talking about my students seeing NT Live, my graduate cohort for historiography this year, we would also go see plays. We went and saw this, and we've never met in person. We've been working together for a year, and I've never met any of these wonderful new scholars, but we had a chance to go into a production of Stagehand and collectively voice what we think the character should do and find ways to make it happen live, make it happen in a very experiential sort of way. Moving around a lot of places, they all wore masks, they all were very cognizant of sort of the situations that are going on with productions and liveness. But what is that interactivity, and how do we want to think about how it might be reshaped? One thing that was really fascinating, there were two instances, October 2020 and recently February 2021. And Stagehand learned a lot from its kind of beta test. Its first round of audience members were almost like the first round of testers to see what they would try to do. What barriers do they try to breach? Which clues do they not pick up on? And what can they produce better to have us work through the space and the environment a little bit more interestingly? I'm particularly interested in not just productions that do this, but how gaming technologies, much like the motion capture shoots that were mentioned there by Nick, will give us new ways to think pedagogically about what we teach and how we can experience performance in a bunch of different spaces. Very cognizant of my time because I want to make sure we hear from our wonderful guests who are also here today. I keep wondering too about what this will mean for the future of our performance experiences. And this is a photo from a colleague at Stanford University, Michael Rowell, whose production of Temping from his company Wolf 359 is, what I love is when Michael describes it, he said, I built a performance that can't make any money for a single person to pretend they're a temporary worker at an insurance company. And he builds a room, and if you buy a ticket, you go alone and you sit at the computer and the phone rings and your email, you have to work for an hour. And it's something that Michael could easily translate to people now, to find a way to transform your home computer into the temporary worker experience. And there's a whole backstory here. You start to get the wrong email from the wrong person and connect who in the office knows who, and all this stuff begins to happen that really changes your experience. But pre-pandemic, it was not a money-making show. It had a lot of physical technology. In fact, the stage manager and Michael were in the other room, typically waiting for you to make decisions and then sending new information to your computer or pretending to be people on the phone calling you to change the story and play along with you and create sort of liveness. So what will happen when performances like this, like Frequencies, like Stagehand, work with some really different ways to envision the future possibilities of theater? And what we'll learn about audience experiences, about partnerships we can create, and about the ways we can use the technology despite vast distances, despite rethinking things like Zoom. Stagehand was all done via Zoom, and thinking about what it could mean to sort of offer people a different sort of experience. I particularly, my favorite thing about Temping, we brought it to Ottawa in Canada to produce it at a theater festival. I got to spend time with the crew in the booth and watch participants go in and watch them spend time making live decisions and producing live theater. And yes, they had a bunch of narrative paths they could follow, but asking themselves what paths the pandemic will allow all of us to think about in the future going forward. I do think too, a particular interest for me in the journal is especially in Canada, which often has a division between our French Canadian productions and our English ones, which ones have found homes beyond language borders through media and through other things, and how that might connect communities a little bit more in stronger ways. So to make sure I don't run out of time to hear from all the lovely people in our audience as well. Thanks first on behalf of all this to the festival for having us, and I'll let Jafar take over and mediate whatever we'll do next.
Thanks very much, Peter. And I did have a couple of questions for the panel, but because we've gone over time quite significantly, perhaps Jafar, if we can open it to attendees and we can take questions from attendees.
Yeah, for sure. People can ask their question, and as well, after this panel, we're going to have a free discussion about this panel actually on a platform named OEA. And
Okay, so I don't know if we can hear attendees and if people are able to speak their questions, but please, if you can do so, or type your question in the chat. So while we're warming up, perhaps I'll start with mine, as this is taking a little bit of time. So I've been thinking about liveness again. I've been thinking about liveness for the last 20 years now, as we all have. And Kevin talked about the shifts of liveness, and Nick talked about liveness as opposed to eventness, or in relation to eventness. We gave various examples of liveness, such as NT live, which I think is a really, really interesting example, because a lot of the NT live projection screenings aren't live, of course, and they screen in different parts of the world at different times. But of course, it's presented as a live experience, and intentionally the before and after of the theatre show is part of the experience. So it is very much about that sense of liveness that you talked about, Nick, rather than the technicality of whether it is happening in real time. But also I was thinking about audience experience as something that we've all been reflecting on, and it kind of reiterated through the different presentations. The audience of the future is what Dream was attempting to research. And as Nick said, according to some people at least, failed in some ways, at least in relation to the experience of the audiences through the interactive aspects of the performance. But so the question, I guess, is how can digital performance that is distributed, that takes place online, offer effective, impactful, and collective experiences? And in thinking of those things, I was also thinking that perhaps both liveness or eventness, however we want to put that, and audience experience are primarily about relationships. So is it about relationships that we're talking about in the end? Is this what we are we're referring to when we're kind of struggling to understand different perceptions of liveness, when we're struggling to reflect on what attending to theatre in different kind of geographical and social contexts might mean for the audiences? Are relationships at the core of it? And I guess it's a question to panelists, but also perhaps to attendees. Would anyone like to offer a response?
I just want to add, if anyone in the attendees, if you have any questions, you can raise your hand and then we can unmute your microphone. You can ask your question.
I'm really intrigued by this idea of the audience, and have been thinking a lot about it. And Nick, thank you for sharing some of your thoughts on that, because like my thoughts are continuing to evolve. Was thinking about it before, and I'm now thinking about it even in different ways. But I was just thinking about, like, in terms of relationships and in terms of some of the other functions of theater and performance that we don't think about all the time, like what Victor Turner called communitas, right? The feeling that when we go and we see an event, a live event, that we're seeing it with other people. And so there's a sense of community that's created through that shared experience. And so I think that's like what we're searching for online, right? It's like, where's that sense of community? And I was fascinated, Nick, about this idea that the data on the fundraiser for that theater production, and the one that was on the, like 72% of the money coming through on the opening night. And that I often think about performance and how performance is, like, our economy is based on performance, right? Like, I study karaoke, and so a lot about karaoke is about, like, the performance drives the commerce. And so I can see how, like, creating an event would drive the donations, right? Because that's part of being that community, and the people who are experiencing that opening night want to be generous and give. And it's also about being seen, right? Like, so being in an audience, in a theater audience, there's just like so much that's different when you're at your home in your pajamas or half pajamas, or losing that control of the audience space, of the auditorium, and then thinking about, like, the connection to other parts of theater history where, you know, the Wagnerian darkened auditorium was not always the model, that there are other models where, you know, either in European history or in other parts of the world where it's very common for people to have conversations in the audience, right? And then what does that mean that now a chat? So like the chat is also, like, I think part of the key of the eventness, right? And that's what makes it the event, is that the projection, the video, could be pre-recorded, but what makes it an event is all of the people in the chat like chiming in and saying, oh, look at what these actors are doing. Oh, look at the design. And like, that's the excitement, right? And so that, again, it's a new paradigm. It's right here, right? We have it, the video and the chat, and we keep seeing this over and over. So that's what I want us to like not lose the sight of why we do theater, right? And like, just not do the theater for doing the theater online, but like, what are we losing in terms of community, or how do we get that back?
Yeah, I just really agree with all of that, Kevin, and what you said, Maria. Absolutely, it's about relationship, and it's about relationship with other audience members, and that's I suppose that's the thing that one, you know, for people who are regular theatre goers, that's what you learn, isn't it? And that's what part of what you fall in love with, I guess, for those who are really, you know, committed audiences in the theatre. And that, you know, oddly, you know, compared with the cinema experience, I was actually talking to a colleague the other day about this, that of course when cinema started and the sort of really got going in the 1920s and 30s and became a real boom industry, of course there was much more of a sense of event around it, and you had these very elaborate auditoriums with multi-color changing lighting systems in them, with an electric organ that would rise up out of the pit with somebody performing it, and all of this paraphernalia that created a sense of event around the showing of the film, all of which has gradually kind of faded away, and we're back to sitting in a, you know, it's just a kind of black box, and the fact you're there with other members of the audience is pretty irrelevant really to the cinema experience. And you know, that kind of contrast I think is really interesting. And then you've got, I don't know how this will kind of translate into other parts of the world, but in the UK, a company called Secret Cinema that creates events around screenings of particularly very well-known sort of films, like a James Bond film or a Star Wars film or something like that, that's got a lot of kind of cultural iconography around it, and people dress up in costume, and there's sort of activities that sit around that experience, but it's built around, you know, the idea of creating that as an event and being part of a community of people who, you know, who love this film. So I think these are all different strategies for creating that sense of, yeah, of community and relationship with people, as well as having the relationship you have with the work that's being made and the people who make it. You have a relationship with other people who want to have that experience together.
Briefly, I think the relationships thing is absolutely critical too. It's this idea that the more time spent in these Zoom boxes, the more our relationships can grow in a similar way. That, you know, like, I don't know that I could have attended Stagehand with strangers and guided an actor, but guiding it with my graduate students was and then as soon as it was done, we had our own Zoom call to, like in the lobby, to talk about what did we do right, what did we do wrong, you know, like to have that moment and recreate those experiences. So it's about those relationships and some time, I guess, that seems to be invested in it, that really speaks to me. And I think that's a really good idea. I think something about what are we going to recreate that mirrors things we knew pre-pandemic, you know. I keep also thinking briefly that when I saw Angels in America from NT Live with that was broadcast in two spots, you know, 2 weeks, the second screening was great because you saw the same faces again, and everyone, you smiled at strangers because suddenly it's NT Live on a screen, not, you know, but it's also in Canada at least a chance to see similar theater-minded folks out at the same cinema going again. So harnessing those things. And I think the cinema question's right. We're going to learn a lot, and we're going to see what transfers when we get back to actual theater.
Thank you. I can't see a question, so I might ask another one.
I think there's a question in Q&A.
Oh, excellent. Let me see. Yes. So Pierre says, hello, I'm a graduate student finishing an MFA degree in embodied dramaturgy at Rose Bruford College. Nick, one of yours. What kind of opportunities and institutions offering theatre students to transition into digital media research and career application? Sorry, what kind of opportunities are institutions offering theatre students to move into digital media research and careers? Would anyone like to respond? And we are on the panel, we are talking from different perspectives in geographical perspective. So we're representing United States, Canada and UK, and perhaps members of the audience could respond from their own perspective. Perhaps Nick, you should go first. Since
yes, I feel sort of responsible somehow. So yeah, I mean, certainly one of the things that we're looking at the moment, now that we've got our motion capture system and kind of related technologies in what we're calling the digital studio, is looking at professional development short courses for people in the industry who want to convert to, or, you know, sort of to work out how their practice might translate into digital environments. So yeah, really actively thinking about that and intending to start piloting something in the next few months. Probably initially around motion capture work for performers who might be, you know, might be quite experienced actors potentially, but who recognise this, particularly as while theatre is still getting back going again, and you know, and the challenges that that's going to be for everyone, I think for a while yet. There are certainly opportunities for actors doing motion capture work. So, but you know, there'll be the equivalents of that for people in all sorts of different disciplines from the live theatre world, in working out how they can translate into digital performance forms.
Thank you.
I have a brief thought on that too. I know at the University of Guelph, we focused on talking about live streaming and working with live streaming and ways to work with green screen, live streaming, trying to harness theater skills with some media skills in general to get not just students practicing it, but witnessing what other people live streaming games are performing constantly. They're almost like the radio DJs of the digital video game world. They're constantly innovating and changing. And likewise for dramaturgy, I found it really interesting that we decided to go back to radio plays at our school and really explore what you have to communicate in playwriting and creativity dramaturgically when you don't have, in our case, the live stage, or in that case, visuals, because it's all voices. So, you know, rethinking models of playwriting and writing and styles to really harness the skill set for students going forward from our production stream. I thought that was really cool this year.
I'll also add that I think, at least at my university, a lot of it has to do with curriculum and the way that curriculum is evolving and the kinds of classes that the theater department is offering, but also classes that we're cross-listing with a new digital storytelling major. Well, it's not actually that new now. It's now about 5 years old, but you know, I've been teaching video editing in digital media and performance classes for about a decade. And what was really cool about that is even our theater students who have taken, who just have like, even just like an advanced beginner level of video editing, when the pandemic came, were the ones that were jumping in and helping out and helping edit the video and figure out the video feeds and everything for our live streaming. So I think just more, you know, I think theater departments will probably need to offer more classes like that might in some cases cross over with, like at the University of Missouri, we have a very small film department that's actually part of a larger visual arts. So there's not like a huge film program. So we also offer script writing, acting for the camera, voiceover, acting for motion capture and animation. Like these are new classes that we're been offering over the past few years and are just going to keep growing. So we'll continue to push that.
Thank you. I just answered a question on the chat, and Sajat, we can, I'd be happy to put together a bibliography and distribute with the slides after the panel. But unless there is another question, I'm going to ask a closing question, which says, we've talked about what we've missed and we've talked about talking back, but do we want to go back to where we were before? And at least being based in the UK and going to some of the, you know, most important theatres in the UK, it is very visible. We know it, but it's also very visible in the architecture of the theatre and the aesthetics, what a classist experienced theatre is, and the classist backgrounds that this art form kind of comes from, at least in contemporary times. Also, obviously, going to the theatre is, we know that the audiences are primarily white, primarily middle class, primarily have above than average income. So what might be the opportunities of this pandemic? Although it's obviously devastated the sector and has created bigger inequalities in some ways, are there opportunities also to create more equality of access in the theatre sector? Would anyone like, but this is also open to attendees, by the way.
I'll just try to answer briefly because I know we're pushing up against time. I think that the question of access keeps coming back to me, and this happened in the move online with education, that some of our students have better internet connections, have better computers, have better access. I keep coming back to the negative, but I want to leave on a positive note, because I think we also, like, I think this does open up new opportunities, right? Like we're talking about community and kind of how communities and communities built through theater and performance have been very, in the past, geographically or locally based, and as technology and just over the past decades, like, is becoming more and more global. And now we're at a conference where we have like many different countries represented in this one space. So I think that's an opportunity to build new communities and to use this technology, and hopefully keep expanding access to that technology. Because even, you know, it's interesting that even some of the places that just you know, don't have necessarily the best internet infrastructure, but might have cellular infrastructure, and so people are accessing via cell phone. There's still people left out. So how do we make sure that everybody has access to that technology and make that happen? And luckily, the pandemic, at least in the U.S., like, a huge change has happened, and what used to be much reluctance to put towards social programs has now. Like, we went from the worst timeline to the best timeline almost overnight almost. So I'm trying to be positive and optimistic and look at those opportunities that maybe we have to make more community.